evening, and it's a great honor to have you here, and it's an even greater honor for me to be hosting this meeting. As Artur said, this has been my dream for many years. This is one of my very favorite films. I first saw it at the tender age of 14, so 30 years ago. I think it may have even corrupted me a little. I'm grateful for that, of course. And I just want to say that even watching it now for the first time on a big screen since then, I'm just stunned that it got made at all. Because these characters, they not only, I feel that they not only proudly stand in defiance of their own age, but I think they also stand in defiance of our age. How on earth did you convince the backers to make a film of the life of Carrington and Strachey?
This film took 18 years from the time I wrote the script to the time, the first day of shooting. It's just a miracle that it was made at all. Strange enough, it was originally written for Warner Brothers, because in the 70s, it was a moment, we get these moments every now and then, it was a moment when English films were very fashionable. I was invited to lunch in the West End of London by a producer who said to me, asked me if I was interested in the Bloomsbury group of writers, and I said, no, not at all. But I said, there is a story that I think I just read this huge biography called Lytton Strachey by Michael Holroyd, and I was very moved by it. So I said, well, there is this relationship that I was very interested in the middle of the Bloomsbury group, and he said, tell me about it. So I told him about it, and he went away, and I didn't even know his name. I couldn't remember his name because I'd just come to lunch from doing something else, and a couple of weeks later we got a contract to. This was 1976, I think, to write a script for what seemed to me an implausible amount of money. So I spent a year, really, and it was a very important year for me because although I'd had some success in the theatre, I hadn't really felt that I understood how to write films, and it was troubling me. So I kind of took this year to think about the differences between the theatre, which I'd come to very naturally, and the cinema, and to work out what the differences were, and to write this script. The result was a script that was about 4 hours long, and it had Virginia Woolf, and it had E.M. Forster, and it had everybody you can think of. And a year had passed, and when it was sent out to Hollywood, this often happens, whoever the guy was who had asked me to write it had gone. So nobody in Warner Brothers could understand what this thing was that had arrived. But they gave it to a man who was famous for doing Neil Simon comedies and musicals, called Herbert Ross. And he liked it very much. So suddenly I was invited to go to Los Angeles, where I hadn't been much before, and work with him on the script. So I did go, and I spent a few weeks there working with him. He was shooting a film called California Suite, so he was a little bit busy. But I spent whatever time I could with him. And then at the end of it, this is also very typical of Hollywood, at the end of it they gave a big party, a lunch party, at Mr. Chow's restaurant. And at a certain point, I turned to Herbert Ross's wife, who was a famous, she ran a ballet company. She'd been a famous ballerina. And I said to her, stupidly, I said to her, have you read my script? She said, well, I read some of it. I said, what did you think? She said, I didn't like it. I said, oh. And the table sort of froze over because it was obvious that she was a very powerful person in his life and that he wasn't going to make a film that... I don't know why they hadn't discussed it before. But anyway, the conversations became very difficult and the producer looked quite ill. And at that point, the door opened and a girl in hot pants and shorts came in with a big cake that said Carrington and put it on the table. And the next day they came and fetched me from the hotel and took me to the airport. And I never heard another word. I never heard anything after that. So that was that. So some years went by, and I had an American producer friend who was called Ronald Shedlow. And he used to stay in my office when he was in London. And he was an insomniac, so he got up and walked around the place, and he found the script. And the next day he said to me, what are you doing with this script? I said, well, Warner Brothers didn't want to do it. And he said, oh, we must do it. So he then worked for another 10 years or something, trying to put together bits of money in the way one does. And then eventually, in the early 90s, the script landed on the desk of the head of Polygram Films in Amsterdam. And he read the script and he said, we'll pay for it. So just like that, it was suddenly happening. Then there was the question of the director. It was going to be directed by an English director called Mike Newell. And we started to work, and he cast Jonathan Pryce. And we were discussing the rest of the casting. And he suddenly phoned up one day and said, I can't do the film, I can't do it. And I said, why? He said, well, I've made a film that's going to be a disaster. So I have to go to America and make a film over there before this film is released, because it's going to finish my career. Well, the film was called 4 Weddings and a Funeral. But he really thought it was going to be a disaster. And so he disappeared. And so we didn't have a director. And one of the producers, who was French, phoned me one evening. By this time, we'd cast Emma Thompson, and we're looking for the rest of the cast. And he said, well, why don't you direct it? And I said, well, because I've never done anything like that before. I don't know how to direct a film. And he said, well, in France it's quite common. It's quite usual for young, for writers to direct their own films. So I said, oh, well, you'll have to let me think about it. So I phoned Emma Thompson. I said, I don't know if I can do this. She said, well, of course you can. Don't be stupid. So I said, okay, well, I'll do it. And it happened. That's the way it happened. And we had this wonderful summer in 1994. And the weather was great. And I discovered how enjoyable it was to direct a film.
Can you tell us a little bit about immersing yourself in the lives of these characters? Lytton Strachey and Dora Carrington are much less familiar outside of England than they are probably there, and still they are not the first characters that we think of when we think of Bloomsbury Group. Actually, we are speaking on the anniversary of the death of Virginia Woolf. Somebody just told me, but. What was it like to immerse yourself in this material of, as I understand it, the biography that you mentioned, but also their personal diaries and letters? How did you make yourself familiar with this group of people, with the dynamics? What was that process like?
Well, very important thing that happened, of course, this was the benefit of having someone like Warner Brothers behind it. I contacted somebody in Warner Brothers and said, I understand there was a correspondence between Carrington and Lytton Strachey. They lived together for 16 years, but they were apart a great deal of the time, and they used to write to each other every day. And I said it would be very interesting for me to read these letters. And I think 10 days later, a big truck appeared outside my house, and they unloaded all these cartons of photocopies of the entire correspondence, everything that Lytton and Strachey had written, Lytton and Carrington had written to each other over all the years that they were together. And that was a tremendous start. But I felt my way into it, you know. Originally the script was called Lytton Strachey, and it was about him more. And then I realized that the character that really moved me, that I was really interested in, and also I admired her art very much. I'd seen quite a lot of it by then. I thought it was beautiful. So I thought, well, maybe the film should be about her. So I switched it around to focus in this. This has happened to me at other times as well. I wrote a film about Freud and Jung and a patient of theirs called Sabina Spielrein. And I wanted to write about Sabina Spielrein, and then somewhere a couple of years into it, I realized that the central character was really Jung. So I had to readjust everything to write about Jung. And so it actually turned out to be a very good thing, I think, that these two characters, Lytton Strachey and Carrington, were not terribly well known. They aren't very well known in England either. They're still not very well known in England. There's been an exhibition of Carrington's paintings this beginning of this year, which is the first one for 30 years in England, because she didn't paint very much. She was never a professional. She didn't like to sell her paintings. She gave them to people, and she didn't do that many. So she did what she had lived the life which any artist would like to live, which is just to make the art, and whatever happens to it, then she didn't really care about. But my point is that it was a good idea to not have it was a better idea to write about them than about the more famous people in Bloomsbury, because when I was writing about Virginia Woolf in the first draft, I was very uncomfortable because I didn't really know everything I should have done about Virginia Woolf. But by the time I'd worked out what I was doing, I think I knew everything. I knew everything about Carrington and everything about Lytton Strachey.
How important it is for you, and when does it come in the whole process, and especially in this case, in the case of Carrington, that moment when you clearly define the subject, the actual theme of the film. There's this wonderful shot here when she's outside of the house and she's looking into those 3 windows with various, sexual encounters going on in each of them, and she's sort of outside looking in. And I always think of this as sort of this symphony of sexual mismatch, really, like this complete sort of cacophony of those encounters that we see in this film. And for me, that is the defining shot of the film.
Well, I actually agree with you. I spent a long time. I think that was the benefit of being able to direct it myself, was that I knew that I needed to spend a lot of time on that shot, because that shot is the story. But to answer your question, it's often not until I'm 2/3 or 3/4 the way through a project that I start to understand what it's about. It kind of tells you, as you're doing it, it tells you what it's about. I mean, all I operate on to begin with is instinct. So I had an instinct about this subject. I had an instinct that there was something very unusual about this relationship that I wanted to explore. But I didn't really know what the film was about until quite late on in writing it, when I, as you say, I understood that it was a film about people dealing with their own loneliness in their own way, and that is not necessarily in the ways that society suggests. In other words, I think it's true to say that I think Carrington had a very happy life, although it may not seem so from the film. But I think she found what she wanted, which was completely unlike anything anyone else would want. But it's what she wanted, and once she got it, she was very, very happy, I think. And that's why she couldn't bear it when it disappeared.
She is unapologetically herself in the film, in her desires and in her choices. Before I open this up to the public, I also want to ask about Lytton, because she's a painter, so by that virtue we see her work, right? We see her paintings in the film. But to really understand who Lytton Strachey was for, let's say, Victorian culture, you mentioned, of course, it's the central point when he publishes this book, Eminent Victorians, which was really a series of essays which attacked the key figures of Victorian era, including Florence Nightingale, by this very pointed biographical commentary. He was an iconoclast, and he was a disruptor. And I think that in your films, many times you come to those characters who disrupt things, Freud and Jung and Rimbaud and Verlaine in Total Eclipse, and you show the effort it takes to disrupt things as they are, and you show the consequences as well. Is that was that a way into the Lytton character?
Yes, and I think it's something that's always interested me. I'm always interested in people who force themselves out to the extreme, or are extreme, or become extreme, and find themselves therefore in conflict with society, because I've always found that very fascinating, and I've had friends who have, I think it's fair to say, destroyed themselves by becoming themselves and being opposed to everything that most other people accept, and I think it's very exhausting to be a kind of rebel or a revolutionary, and I guess I'm not, because I sit home and write about it, but it's always been something that's more than intrigued me. It's obsessed me in a way over the years, and a lot of the people I'm interested in writing about, especially biographically, are these people who have, on the one hand, discovered a kind of truth, and on the other hand, have destroyed themselves trying to embed that truth or establish that truth.
One more question, and then I'm opening this up about Lytton and the introduction of the character. I love that the way that you introduce your characters in your script, and this is no exception. This very small, very short scene when he, gets off the train and he's offered a choice, and for him it's a purely aesthetic choice between the drivers, really, not between the vehicles, and this is the first thing he does. He makes an aesthetic judgment.
Yes.
And in a way, this is what he's doing throughout the movie, right?
It's very and that's also true. In fact, the movie had always started with the tribunal scene where he refuses to fight in the First World War. The script had always started with that, but somehow when it became close to shooting it, I thought, for reasons I couldn't have explained as clearly as you just have, I thought that maybe what we needed to do was to see him in a situation away from all his friends, where he was himself in the way that you've just described.
This is the moment for the audience. Are there any questions? And is there a microphone that we can also... Oh, okay, so there's the mic, and I think there's a question here in the first row.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say that I love your scripts, so it's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
And I want to ask you about collaboration between screenwriter and director, because and what makes this collaboration good, and maybe you have some tips for, I don't know, directors, how to, have a good collaboration.
Well, I've been very lucky with the directors that I've worked with, both the directors who've actually gone on to make the films, but I also spent time working with some great directors, Fred Zinnemann, Joe Mankiewicz, David Lean, and in all those cases, the film that I was working on was not made, but I did learn a lot from working with them. I mean, I think if I started again as a young man, I might want to direct some more than I have. But in fact, I think there's a kind of objectivity that comes from a good collaboration with a director that's probably better than it might be better than if you directed yourself. In this context, for me, a very important figure is Stephen Frears, who, when I was young and writing for television, he was a television director. And the first original television film that I wrote, he directed. And I discovered that there was such a thing as a director who wanted the writer to be there all the time, which is unusual. I mean, in fact, Stephen has it in his contract that the writer should be on set all the time. And I asked him why once, and he said, well, because you change your mind. You see you look at what's happening in a scene or on the set, and maybe you'll get a better idea, and maybe you won't. It's fine. You just sit there. But if you get a better idea, we can change something and we can adjust something, and that's, in an ideal relationship between a writer and a director, that will go on. Now, there are also directors who don't want the writer on the set. So, for example, I worked with Joe Wright on a film called Atonement. I worked very closely with him, and we got the script. We did lots of drafts together of the script. And then he went and made the film, and he shot exactly what we'd written. And when I visited the set, I felt that I really made him uncomfortable. I felt he was happier when I wasn't there, so I didn't go very much, hardly ever, a couple of times only. And it's just a temperamental thing that particular directors have, I just go with whatever makes them comfortable, really, because it is, it's a director's medium. If I work in the theatre, I expect it. I think of the theatre as a writer's medium, and I expect to, as it were, be in charge in the theatre. But I think on the film set, the director is in charge, and you need to. One of your jobs is to try and work out what the director needs and what he wants, or he or she wants, and provide it. And for me, it's working closely with the director is a part of the pleasure of writing films.
Just out of curiosity, how was it on the set of Carrington, where you were both? Did you find yourself rewriting parts of it, or was it so established by then that you...
No, I didn't actually. I shot exactly what I had in front of me, and later on, when the editor said, "Let's start work," I said, "Well, we haven't got much to do, have we? We just put it together," because what I hadn't understood at that point was just how important the contribution of the editor is, and how an editor can improve a story or change it in ways that move the film towards what you're trying to say. So that, yeah, but I mean, the thing about I found directing Carrington was how pleasurable it was, how much I enjoyed it. And when I said to Stephen Frears, I had no idea that it would be so enjoyable. He said to me, "That's because you're not a director."
Proszę bardzo, tutaj jeszcze w pierwszym rzędzie, tak? Tam jeszcze, tutaj. Dziękuję bardzo.
Hi, it was such a pleasure to see this movie. It was my first time, and I think it's such a pleasure to have the opportunity to ask you about a particular scene. And as Michał Oleszczyk said, the scene with Emma Thompson looking on the
Yes.
house outside was like, for me, the most visually appealing. But in this movie, there was a scene that was very small, and I would like to ask you about it, and could you elaborate on it? Because it was the scene with the crossword, where Emma is asking, how do you spell intangible?
Oh gosh,
I love this scene. Really.
I love this scene too. But I can't explain why. I just wrote it one day, and she asked him how to spell a word, and he, I can't even remember what the word was, but
intangible.
Intangible, that's right. Intangible, of course, it was a carefully chosen word. And she says, "How do you spell intangible?" And she's clearly spelt it completely wrong. So when he tells her, she says, "Oh, never mind."
Yeah.
And as you say, it's 30 seconds, but it says an enormous amount about their relationship, I think. And whenever I see the film, I always enjoy that little moment between them. And they both the actors, of course, were wonderful in the film, but they play that scene beautifully.
Yeah, I just think that it was such a gem, and I thought that it was really unexpected for me, this scene that it's only sharing a moment with them, and I think that it was a gem. Thank you for this.
Thank you. Good.
Thank you so much. Tom, over there.
I had never seen this film before either, and I'm surprised by how contemporary some of the themes of the film are, given that it's a costume film and it's 30 years old. I'm wondering if I'm curious about how you feel, where the discussion on non-monogamous relationships was when you were first writing the film, and when it got released, which I understand was later, and where do you think we are now in this discussion where on one hand there seems to be some kind of new puritanism, and actually this film seems quite could seem controversial to some people today, I think. And on the other hand, there seems to be more debate on different kinds of relationships other than monogamy.
I think it's always through history been the case that those issues have been fluid, and that people have sometimes believed that monogamy is important, and sometimes they feel it's not so important. And in a way, the time that I wrote it, which was the 70s, mid-70s, was a time rather like the 20s, which the film deals with, where all these issues were being re-examined, and there were far more people in the 70s who were starting to live in open relationships and not following traditional lines. I don't think that's quite the way now. I mean, I think that somehow we've moved into a slightly more puritanical age in various ways. And there are a lot of things that people don't like to think and don't like to say. So in a sense, I think it's probably more, and I don't know where the 90s comes in that, which is when I made the film. I have the sense that that was already a little bit less free than the 70s in that respect. I certainly felt that at the time. but I think these issues are always fundamental to all of us. We have to make these decisions, and my position is that freedom is better than the opposite. Of course, there are many people who are very comfortable in monogamous relationships, and that's fine. But the point is that the interesting thing about Lytton Strachey and Carrington was that they've complemented each other's needs, really. Nothing that either of them needed interfered with anything that the other one needed. So they were just able to have a marvelous friendship and enjoy each other's company while they pursued the different directions that their sexuality took them in. In other words, I think at the time the film was defined by somebody as a film about the difference between sex and love, I guess it is that those are the areas that it's examining.
Well, thank you so much. And there's a question over there here.
It's a great honor to ask you a question. I've seen the movie for the second time and, of course, discovered new things. But my question is whether you had special pleasure shooting some scenes and another one. What scenes brought you a lot of suffering, pain, and surprises?
I didn't really have any suffering during the film. I think Emma Thompson doesn't like to do very many takes. She thinks, and she's usually right. And Anthony Hopkins is similar in this way, that when she's done 2 or 3 takes, she thinks that's okay. And there were 1 or 2 scenes, particularly I think the scene in when she's with Lytton Strachey before they go to live together, when she's begging him to stay with her, that I made her do, I think, 13 takes, and she was very. I think that involved a little suffering on her behalf. But the scenes that I enjoyed doing most, I think, were the scene that we talked about where she's outside the window, outside the house. There's a scene also where I had to. I was told it wasn't technically possible. And I was told that I would have to pay for the scene if it didn't work. And it's a scene at the very end of a section where Samuel West, who plays Gerald Brennan, goes out to wait for her on where they first had a rendezvous on White, and she's forgotten all about him. And I decided it would be nice to have him disappear out of the top of the screen. The producer said it's impossible. But in fact, nothing's impossible. And there was a marvelous Steadicam operator who I had worked with on that film and worked on a subsequent film, The Secret Agent, that I made, and also was working on Atonement, where he created a world-famous shot of 5 minutes on the beach at Dunkirk. But anyway, I talked to him about this, and he said what would have to happen was that he would have to be tied up and walk backwards down the side of this steep hill, held on by all the riggers at either end of the rope at the top, and then it would be simple. So we did it, and I didn't have to pay for the scene, but I very much I always enjoy it when I see it because it was I was told it was impossible.
I always like to think of this film as well as a comedy of manners. There's this wonderful moment when Carrington offers her defense of this relationship, and she says that you always have to put up with something, which seems deeply true of any relationship, traditional, non-traditional. But there are many lines in the film, when Lytton says that, I feel like I'm a character in a farce by Molière. It's a wonderfully funny film as well. And specifically, I wanted to ask about those 3 men in her life.
Yes.
Because they seem to be a satire of three different types of British masculinity.
Well, the one person who was very unhappy with the film was a woman called Frances Partridge, a very intelligent, interesting woman, who married Rafe after the, you see Lytton meet her, and she has a couple of scenes with towards the end of the film, and she was still alive. She was the only one that was still alive, and she in fact lived to be 104. And she was very unhappy at the portrait of her husband. She said he wasn't like that at all. So I was worried about that. It concerned me. Except that I thought, well, the evidence is that he was like that, and the scenes where he did say, conscientious objectors should be put up against a wall and shot, and said, slightly outrageous things like that. All happened before she met him. So, and were independently attested to by other people. So I guess it's very hard to make a film about real people where everybody involved is going to be happy. I don't think Donald Trump was very happy about The Apprentice. But I tried very hard to make each of those characters true to what they were. Mark Gertler, the painter, was famously sort of explosive. He also committed suicide later in life. Rafe Partridge became, in the Second War, having fought all the way through the First World War, he then very illogically became a conscientious objector in the Second World War, and refused to fight. Worked for Virginia Woolf for most of her life, rather. And Gerald Brennan was a good writer about Spain. He's very well thought of in Spain. He went and lived there for the rest of his life. Getting to know each of these different characters was very interesting, and they were all very well documented because people wrote letters. I think it'd be very hard to know as much about a group of people today unless you were able to read all their emails, which you probably wouldn't be able to.
We will still have time for one or two questions from the audience. One more question from me, though. This is a very British film in many, many ways, deeply immersed in British culture, but you also worked on many projects where you met people from outside of British culture, where you met people from other cultures. And tell me about this experience of working, particularly on a script, but maybe on a film project, with somebody who represents a different culture from yours. What's the default sort of mode of working with something like that? What's the adventure for you like?
I think it's very enriching to your life to try and write about other parts of the world and other cultures. And I've gone quite far afield. I've written films set in Southeast Asia. I've written plays set in South America. And every time, I guess one of the reasons for doing it is that it involves you going there and trying to absorb the culture firsthand and make friends with people who will explain things that you don't understand yourself. And so, of course, I've had done much more of that kind of work with Europe, and particularly France, where I've had a long relationship with all sorts of French producers and French directors, and I'm very, I like French films very much as well. So that sensibility comes naturally to me. But Joseph Conrad was Polish. I've done two scripts from his novels, and it's the same as going to another country. You take a writer like Joseph Conrad, you have to go to that country that is Joseph Conrad, which is different from anybody else, and different from anybody else's personality, and the flavor of the writing is different. And so, I always, you know, if I'm asked what are my hobbies, I say traveling, because I've always loved traveling, and I always learn from traveling.
Thank you so much. Are there any other questions from the audience? We still have some time here and here. And yes.
Hi, it's a pleasure to meet you. My question is, have you ever wondered what would happen to the film if Warner Bros. Actually took it? And what would happen, because the 10 years also probably kind of, you know, did something to the creating of the film. So I wonder if you ever...
What was the first part of the question? Have I ever wondered what would happen after...
if Warner Bros. Took the film.
Warner Brothers, had they actually
Warner
produced
Brothers.
this film in the
I think-
70s?
Yes,
The thing
Would
is...
Meryl Streep play Carrington?
exactly.
The thing is, it was actually cast, I can tell you, with Vanessa Redgrave and Peter O'Toole, which wouldn't have been uninteresting. It would have been quite interesting. But you see, the film would really not have worked. I mean, I think they would have understood at some point that this was an impossible project for Hollywood, and withdrawn from it, because it doesn't conform to... I'm not saying that Hollywood is conformist, but it does have a certain number of boundaries which this film crosses. And I was thinking the other day, which I hadn't thought before, I've had 19 films made, and I realized that none of them had ever been with an American director or made in America. And first of all, it surprised me, because I've written a lot of films for American companies. It's just that they never make them. And the reason they never make them is, I think, because somewhere along the line they understand that they don't understand. And so that, you know, so that it's better for them to stop and stand back. And I think it was great that I guess I wouldn't have written the script if I hadn't had that lunch with that guy whose name I can't remember. But on the other hand, once I had written the script, however well-intentioned everyone was, and I think Herb Ross's wife was right, because, you know, when I said to her, well, why don't you like it? She said, it's about a lot of pissy English people.
There's a question right in the center, I see. Mm-hmm.
Well, hello, and thank you so much for the film. It's such a beautiful work of art. I really love it. It's my second time with the film. But I wanted to ask you about working with Michael Nyman, because he had a very distinctive style and it affects the story in a certain way. Were you working together, or was he on his own?
I didn't know him, absolutely didn't know him at all. And so I contacted him because I liked his work very much. I liked the films that he'd written music for. I felt he'd written music for them very well. And he came to see me. He turned out to be, what's the word? It occurred to me that he was not, that there were other agendas, I think. And so when he said to me, what music of mine do you like? And I said, well, you know, there's a string quartet of yours, which I absolutely love. He said, that'll do very well for the film. So the main music in the film is that string quartet. And that was easy for him, because it was already existing music. But having said that, he then was very, very thoughtful to work with, because he gave, he gave each character a kind of leitmotif, and very skillfully blended those character studies, And he's just all round brilliant. I mean, the scene in Venice, which I didn't have any music for at all. I don't know quite why I didn't have any music. I said to him, Michael, where's the music for Venice? He said, oh. And he came round to the studio and improvised on the piano the music that's on the soundtrack now. So he was brilliant. But in an unexpected way. I didn't know what to expect when I met him, and I think he has his own way of solving problems, and he solved them very well on this film.
We have to slowly wrap up, so just to use the metaphor that you gave us, thank you for taking us to those two beautiful countries, Dora Carrington and Leighton Strachey. Thank you so much for this film. Thank you so much, Christopher Hampton.
Thank you.
Please, applause.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you.